BetterAuth is a new authentication framework for TypeScript. You can use this with pretty much any framework out there to build complete full stack authentication system and a lot of other things also. In this video, I'm going to show you how to work with BetterAuth in Next.js application to implement features like user registrations, email verification, password reset, authentication using credentials and social providers, working with middleware, working with sessions, working with plugins, and a lot of other really important stuff. We'll be doing everything step by step from scratch. I've arranged the content in this video in a very logical sense, so it is highly recommended that you do not skip any part of the video. Before we get started, two important things you need to know. First is, I'm going to be using MongoDB as a database in this video, along with Prisma ORM. Second thing is, I'm going to be using database session strategy. Database session strategy essentially means I'm going to store all of the data related with sessions in my database. Let's start by creating a fresh Next.js project. So I'm going to execute this command pnpm-dlx create next app latest, and then I can specify the name of the projects. So let's call this better auth tutorial. If you're using npm, the command for you would be npx create next app latest better auth tutorial. I'm going to choose all of the default options. I'm going to open this folder inside of my code editor. I will start my development server by executing this command pnpm dev. For you, this would be npm run dev if you're using npm. I'm going to open localhost 3000 and we can see our application over here. Now the first thing that I'm going to be doing is I'll go to this app directory and then go to this page.tsx. This page basically represents our home page. I'm going to remove all of this content and then add some simple JSX over here like this. And this is what we have right now. Next, I'm going to add some basic components to our application to provide some structure to our application. So at the root of the project, I'm going to create a new directory called components. And inside of this, the first component that I'm going to be creating is this navbar component. Now this is going to be a very simple component. As you can see, I'm just returning this nav.jsx from here, which contains a link and then some of the buttons that we have over here. Now these buttons are coming from shadcn, which we'll be installing in a bit. But before we do that, let's actually make this navbar part of our layout. So I'm going to come to this layout.tsx file, and inside of this file, I'm simply going to add a navbar like this. I'm also going to wrap my children with a div that has this basic styles, in which I'm setting all of the pages should have a minimum height of screen. That means 100 VH. And then I'm applying a padding top of 20 because at the top of the page we have this navigation bar, and then I'm just specifying some of the display related properties. Okay, so the next component that I'm going to be creating is this loading button component. And this is also a very simple component. As you can see, I'm importing this button from shadcn, and then this expects you to pass some of the things like pending, children, on click. So when pending is true, this is going to show a loader, as you can see over here. Otherwise, it is just going to show the children that you have passed. Okay, let's now install our dependencies. First, let's install shadcn. Okay, in order to install and set up shadcn in our project, I'm going to execute this command pnpm-dlx shadcn. Let's use the latest version, and then I can pass init. I can also pass this -d, which is basically going to choose all of the default option at once. And then I'm just going to execute this command. If you are using npm, the command for you would be npx shadcn latest init -d. So after executing this command, the shadcn is set up in our project. Now I'm going to install all of the components that I need from shadcn. For example, card, form, input, button, select, switch, table, toast, all of these things. Okay, so all of the shadcn components has been installed. We have also installed this toast component, and in order to use toast in your application, you need to make it part of the layout. So let's actually do that first. I'm going to go to layout file. Just below this div, I can actually import this toaster component like this. And make sure we import this toaster from this location, components UI toaster. The next dependency that we need to install is Zod. So I'm going to execute this command pnpm add Zod. Now Zod, if you do not know, is a schema declaration and validation library. And we are going to be using Zod in this video to actually validate the data. If you're using npm, the command for you would be npm install Zod. Alright, the next step is to install Prisma. First, we need to install Prisma as a dev dependency. This is going to give us access to a lot of the CLI based commands, which we'll be taking a look a little bit later. So make sure you install Prisma as a dev dependency, and then we need to install Prisma client as the main dependency. This Prisma client is going to be responsible for communicating with the database from your application. npm add client Prisma or npm install client Prisma. So it looks like I got this error. Probably I'm not typing the name of the package correctly. Let's try this other one. So I think it is Prisma client. Okay, now it's installed as you can see over here. Perfect. Okay, now the last step is to initialize Prisma in our project. So for that, I'm going to be executing this command pnpm dlx prisma init. And since I'm using MongoDB in this video, I'm going to provide another argument, data source provider, and then I'm going to pass MongoDB as a database. After executing that command, this has basically created this Prisma folder, which contains a schema.prisma file. And in this file, we'll be creating all of our schema. Before we do that, we need to actually add this database URL environment variable to our .env file. So I'm actually going to create a .env file at the root of the project. So it looks like .env file has already been created by Prisma. So that's a good thing. And Prisma also added this database URL environment variable, which contains an example database connection string. I'm going to replace this connection string with my own connection string from MongoDB Atlas. Finally, we need to create a Prisma instance. So in this prisma.ts file that I have created inside of this lib folder, so in this file, what I am doing is I'm actually declaring that the global object contains this Prisma global variable. Then I'm checking if this Prisma global instance present in the global object. I'm simply going to return that instance. Otherwise, I'm going to call this function Prisma client singleton, which is going to create a new instance of the Prisma, and then we'll export that instance out of the file. In the end, we need this last line so that we make sure that Prisma instance is reused across hot reloads in development. Alright, the TypeScript issue that we are seeing over here is because we have not generated the Prisma client yet. We'll fix this a little bit later in the video. Okay, let's now install and set up BetterAuth step by step. First, we need to install BetterAuth package. So for that, I'm going to execute this command pnpm add BetterAuth. If you're using npm, the command for you would be npm install BetterAuth. Okay, so BetterAuth has been installed, and specifically the version that is installed is 1.0.7. Next step is to generate an auth secret. So for that, I'm going to execute this command pnpm dlx betterauth CLI, and let's use the latest version of this CLI, and then I'm gonna pass secret. So now you can see that this has generated an auth secret. I can simply copy all of this, go to my environment file, and in this one, I can simply add this over here. For the base URL, I'm also going to add this another environment variable, BetterAuth URL, in which I'm going to set up the base URL of my application. Then we need to create an auth instance. So at the root of the project, I'm going to create a new file, auth.ts. In this file, I'm going to import BetterAuth and BetterAuth options from BetterAuth. And I'm going to call this BetterAuth. This expects you to pass a configuration object like this. The type of this object is going to be something like BetterAuth options. So when we do something like this, this is going to give us a lot of the intelligence related to TypeScript. We then need to export this auth instance out of the file. Since I'm using Prisma, I need to import this Prisma adapter. And then inside of this configuration object, I need to specify this database property where I can say that I'm using this Prisma adapter. And this Prisma adapter basically expects you to pass two arguments. First one is this Prisma instance, what we have created inside of this lib folder. And in the second one, we specify the provider that we're using, database provider basically. So let me also import Prisma instance. I'm going to fix this one. All right, so we have basically instructed BetterAuth that we are going to be using Prisma adapter along with MongoDB database. Perfect. Okay, now next step is to set up Prisma schema. So if we take a look at this schema.prisma file, you can see that we do not have any models yet. Now we can use BetterAuth CLI to generate all of the schema that is required. But the problem in our case is that we have not generated the Prisma client yet. And in order to generate the Prisma client, we need to have at least the user model set up inside of the schema.prisma file. Because right now, if I try to execute this command, pnpm dlx betterauth CLI latest version generate, this is supposed to generate all of the schema based on your auth configuration file. But when I execute this command, you can see that I'm getting this error. Could not read your auth configuration, cannot find module Prisma client default. And if I try to generate my Prisma client by executing this command, you'll see that I'm getting this error. You do not have any models defined in your schema.prisma file, so nothing will be generated. So I'm actually going to create all of the models that are required manually. Okay, so I have copy pasted my models over here. We specifically need only 4 models. This user model, then the session model, then the account model, and then this verification model. Now inside of this user model, the first thing to notice is that the type of ID that I'm using is the CUID. So CUIDs are essentially collision resistant IDs, and these are supposed to work with any kind of database basically. You could also do something like auto, but when I tried doing something like this, it was not working properly with BetterAuth. So let's use CUID for now. And then we have this name, email verified, image, and all of these fields. And then I'm essentially creating 2 relations, basically sessions and accounts, as you can see over here. I'm going to include this schema.prisma file in the Git repository, so you'll be able to take a look at all of the things that I have added basically. Or you can come to BetterAuth documentation and then go to database, and here you'll find all the information related to the schema. So you can see all of the core schema. The user table should have all of these fields. You can see all of the types, and they have also specified which fields should be optional, all of that stuff. So you can go through this, and depending upon whatever database you're using, you can actually create all of these fields by yourself. Again, you only have to create all of this manually if the generate command is not working for you. Now I'm going to generate my Prisma client. Since I have added a lot of models in the schema.prisma file, I need to push all of these changes to the actual database. So I'm going to execute this command pnpm prisma db push. This is going to push all of the changes to the database, and then this is also going to generate the Prisma client for me. Perfect. So you can see that all of these collections has been created and the Prisma client has also been generated. Perfect. Now if you take a look at this prisma.ts file, you can see that we are still getting this TypeScript related error. So in this specific scenario, we just need to restart the TypeScript server, or you can simply restart your VS Code if you want. I'm going to restart the TypeScript server. Now we can see that we do not have any errors related to TypeScript. Now next step is to set up authentication methods. So I'll go to my auth.ts file that I have created over here. And in this one, I'm going to add this property email and password. Okay, this is going to be an object. In this one, I'm going to enable email and password. And I'm also going to require email verification. That means whenever someone registers through my application, they should have a verified email address. In order to set up this email verification part, I'm going to add another property over here, which is going to be email verification. This is again going to be an object. Now in this, I'm going to pass some of the very important properties. First is this send on sign up. I'm setting this to true, which basically means whenever someone registers for a new account, we should send them a verification email so that they can verify their email address. Second thing is I'm going to specify auto sign in after verification. And what this means, when the user clicks on the link that they got in their email address, if that link is valid, the user should be logged in automatically in the browser. And finally, we need to create the send verification email function. This is the function that is going to be triggered every single time we need to send an email to the user, specifically related with email verification. So you can see that when we call this function, we get access to this user and token. And here what I'm doing is basically I'm generating this verification URL. So you can see that first I basically put base over here, and then API auth verify email. This is very important. You cannot change this one. And then as a query parameter, I'm going to send the token. And then in the callback URL, I'm going to send this email verification callback URL. So user will be redirected to this callback URL if their email is successfully verified. Okay, so what I'm doing over here is I'm just creating the verification URL, and then I'm calling this send email function that we are going to be creating in a bit. And we're passing all of the data that we want to send to this particular user along with the verification URL, as you can see over here. Let's add this environment variable to our .env file. And then the value of this email verification callback URL is going to be something like this. I'm going to create this page a little bit later, okay? Before we actually create that page, let's first create the send email function, which is actually going to be responsible for sending the email from our system to the user email address. So at the root of the project, I'm actually going to create another folder. Let's call this actions. Inside of this, I'm going to create a file email.ts. And here's what I'm doing in this file. First of all, this is going to be a server action file. What this directive at the top of the file means that all of the functions that I'm exporting out of this file is only going to be executing on the server side. I'm going to be using sendGrid to send the mails to our users. So I'm first basically importing this as Gmail package, sendGrid mail package, and then I'm checking if we have the correct environment variables present, setting the correct API key, then creating a message object which contains all of the information that we pass to this function, and then we are actually sending this message to the user. Now the rest of the function here is just boilerplate code. We do not need to worry about this, okay? The important thing to understand here is I'm just importing the sendGrid mail function, taking all of the data and then sending it to the user. That's it. Let me install this package also. I'm going to come here. I'm going to say pnpm add and then the name of the package. Perfect. Then we can come to this auth.ts file and then we can actually import the server action as you can see over here. Now we need to set up a catch-all route at this exact location. So inside of this app directory, I'm going to create a new folder called API. Inside of this API folder, I'm going to create another folder called auth. Inside of this auth, I'm going to create another folder, which is going to be a catch-all route. And then inside of this folder, let's create this route handler basically. In this route handler, we are going to import the auth instance that we have created. And then since we are using next.js, we need to import to next.js handler from better auth next.js. We are going to call this by passing the auth instance, and then we are just going to export get and post method out of this route handler. Now, if you have watched my next.auth video, this is exactly same as that video itself. Okay, now the last thing that we need to do is we need to create an auth client instance. So at the root of the project, I'm going to create a new file called auth client.ts. This auth client file is going to help us interact with our auth server. And in this file, I'm just going to import the create auth client from better auth React. And then we need to call this create auth client function, pass a configuration object where I'm just passing this base URL for now. And then we are exporting this auth client. Now here's the thing, to put all of this very simply, whenever you need to do anything associated with authentication or better auth on the client side, I'm going to use this auth client instance, right? But when it comes to doing those things on the server side, I'm going to use this auth.ts, auth instance basically. So this auth.ts is going to be for server side of things, and then this auth client is going to be for client side of things. All right. Now, if we take a look at this auth.ts file where I have created this verification URL, you can see that I am specifically targeting this endpoint API auth verify email. Now the question is, how do I know if something like this exists? In order to see all of the endpoints that Better Auth has created for you and all of the plugins that has created any endpoints, we can actually use a plugin called OpenAPI, and we need to import this from Better Auth plugins, okay? And then I'm going to use this plugins property. And here I'm simply going to call this OpenAPI. Now, including this plugin is going to give you access to this particular route API auth reference. This route is going to show you all of the endpoints that Better Auth has created in your project. So if I start my development server, go to the browser and try to access this route, let's say API auth reference, you can see all of these endpoints that we have present. For example, sign in social, get session, sign out, sign up email, you get the idea. And here you can also see all of the models that we have present in our application, user, session, account, verification. Now, if you click on any of these endpoints, you can see what kind of a request do we need to make, where do we need to make, what kind of data do we need to send, and information about different query parameters. All right. Now, if you take a look at the terminal, you'll see that I'm getting this error, package Oslo cannot be external. The request Oslo auth2 matches server external packages. This is probably related with TurboPack. So I'm going to actually disable the TurboPack for now. And let's see if we still get that error. I'm going to start the development server. I'm going to come here. I'm going to refresh the page. And now we can see that we are not getting any error related to Oslo package. Perfect. Okay, now the last thing that we need to do here is we need to create this email verified page. So inside of this app directory, I'm going to create a route group. Let's call this auth. And in this one, I'm going to create a new folder, email verified. This email verified folder is going to have a page.tsx file because we want to make this route publicly accessible. And then this page is just going to contain very simple JSX like this. Heading which says email verified, your email has been successfully verified, and then a link which takes the user back to the home page. Now the reason why this says email verified, because I know for a fact that user will be coming to this page after their token is valid or after they have successfully verified their email address. And then later in the video, I'm gonna be protect this page so that user will be able to access this page only if they're logged in. And remember, if we take a look at this auth.ts configuration file, we have specifically instructed as soon as the email verification is done, user should be logged in automatically. That means I can simply protect this page email verified because I know if user is trying to access this page, the email is already verified. And we can show them this link of go to home page. Okay, so far we have installed ShadCN, Zod, we have set up Prisma, and we have also set up the better auth. Now let's create our sign up pages. So inside of this auth route group, I'm going to create another folder called sign up. This is going to contain a page.tsx file. Now let me explain what I'm doing in this file. First of all, this is going to be a client component. And then I'm importing a lot of components from ShadCN like card, form, input. I'm also importing the loading button component that we have created in the beginning of the video. We are importing link component from next.js. We are importing sign up schema, which does not exist at this point, which we'll be creating in a bit. And then if we take a look at the JSX markup, you can see that I'm just returning this div, which contains this card element. Now this card has this card header, basically, which has a card title that says create account. And in the card content, we have this form component from ShadCN. Now this form component contains the form element. This form element contains the form field component, as you can see over here, and the loading button. Okay. Then this form field component contains this render prop, which basically returns this form item, which contains form label, form control, which contains this input basically, right? So even though the structure seems a little bit complex, it is actually fairly easy and straightforward to understand when you take the time to understand, okay? And the reason why we are creating form like this, because this is going to make it very easy for us to create a very robust user experience. Now let's first create the sign up schema now. So inside of this lib folder that we have over here, I'm going to create a new file called zod.ts. And in this file, I'm actually importing object and string from Zod. And then I'm going to create a new sign up schema by calling this object method. And then I'm passing an object. This object contains this name, email, password, and confirm password properties. In the name, you can see that I'm calling this get name schema. So we can see that the name is going to be string. And if this is required, we should show them this error. And if the name is 1 character, we are going to show them name is required. If the name exceeds 50 characters, we are going to show them name must be less than 50 characters. And similarly, we have set up rules for email and password. So this password schema function that I have created, this expects a type argument basically, in which you can specify whether you're talking about the password schema or confirm password schema. And based on this argument, I'm just changing these message over here, nothing else. So in very simple terms, this is how we are setting up all the schema. And then as a rule, since our password and confirm password should be same, we are also using this refine method, which basically gives us access to all of the data that we have added over here. And then we can do some sort of conditional check that if this does not match, I'm going to show them this message passwords don't match. And then we are exporting this schema out of the file sign up schema. Then we can come to the sign up page. And now we can see that this is not detecting this file. So I'm going to restart the TypeScript server. And now we can see that we are not getting any error related to sign up schema at this point. Okay, now the next step is to create a form instance. So for that, I'm going to be importing a few things like use form from React Hook Form, Zod resolver from Hook Forms resolver Zod, and then Z from Zod. And then I'm calling this hook use form over here. I'm passing this object also, which contains two important properties, resolver and default values. Default values is self-explanatory. To resolver, we are specifying that for data and schema validation, we are using Zod. And then we need to come to this form component, and we need to spread out all of the things that we get from form instance and pass all of that as a prop to this form component like this. To all of the form fields, we are also going to be adding a control, and the value of this is going to be form.control. Now, just so that you can understand this in a clear way, I'm going to explain this one more time. Let me zoom out a little bit. So we have this form component from shadcn, which contains this form JSX element. Now inside of this form, I'm actually looping through an array which contains 4 items basically: name, email, password, and confirm password, because we want to render 4 fields in the form. For each of this, we are actually returning a form field. Now this form field has this important render prop, which basically gives you access to the field, the current field that we are talking about. From this render prop, we return a form item. And this form item contains this form label, which we are adding over here. Then we are having this form control, which contains the input. The type of the input I am setting based on the type of field that I have. So if the field is password, the type is going to be password. If the field is email, the type is going to be email. And in all other cases, the type is going to be text. Now the last thing that we need to do is we need to set up what happens when someone submits this form. Okay, that means we need to add an onSubmit event handler. So in this form, I'm simply going to add this onSubmit. So in this form, I'm going to use this onSubmit prop. The value of this is going to be form.handleSubmit, and then this onSubmit function that you need to create. More like this. Now here's the part that you have been waiting for. Since this is a client component, I'm going to import the auth client. And then in this onSubmit callback, I'm going to call this function authClient.signup.email. And since this is going to be an async operation, let's convert this function to async like this. And in this one, here's what I'm doing basically. I'm calling this authClient.signup.email function. In this one, I basically pass 2 arguments. Both of these are objects, by the way. In the first object, I pass all of the data like email, password, and name. And in the second argument, we have a lot of very important functions that is available. So whenever the request gets initiated, this callback gets executed on request. When the registration is successful, this onSuccess callback will be executed. And if there's any error, this onError is going to be executed. So let me create some state variables like setPending. And then let's also import the toast from shadcn to use these properly. So I'm gonna come here. First, I'm going to create these state variables pending, setPending. I'm also going to import useState from React. Okay. And then we need to import toast by calling the useToast function. And we need to import useToast from hooks useToast. Okay. And then I can use this pending and pass this to my loading button over here. So if I open this loading button, you can see that if the pending is true, we're going to show them this loader. Otherwise, we are going to show all of the things that they have passed as a child of this button. So this is the only thing that we needed to do on the client side. If you think about it, you just need to import your auth client instance. You need to call this signup method. You specify the type of provider that you're talking about, then pass the data, and then you have access to all of these callbacks that you can use to show different UI or state to your user. So let's see if this is actually working or not. I'm going to open my application and go to localhost 3000. Okay, I'll go to sign up page. You can see this is the form that we have. If I click on this sign up, you can see that we are getting all of the validation errors that all of these fields are required. So let's try actually entering the information over here. I'm gonna enter my name, my email address, my password, and then I'm going to click on this sign up button. Let's see what happens. So when I click on this sign up button, you can see that I'm getting this notification that your account has been created. Check your email for a verification link. Interesting. So if I go to my account, okay, it looks like I have not received any email because I've just checked. my API key was not correct. I fixed it, and let's try doing this again. I'm going to reset my database, start the development server again, click on this sign up button. We are getting this notification that your account has been created. Check your email for a verification link. If I go to the browser and check, and now you can see that I'm actually getting the email from my server. If I click on this, you can see this contains this email verification link. Now when I click on this, my email is going to be verified. And now I'm basically redirected to this particular page, email verified. Okay. Now, if you remember that we have also configured this thing in the auth configuration file that if the email is verified, user should be logged in automatically. And here we are not seeing if the user is logged in or not. And the reason for that is because we are not showing or rendering things conditionally based on if the user is logged in or not. Let's actually check if we have a cookie present in the application tab. So if I come to cookies, go to localhost 3000, we can see betterauth.session token, which basically means that the user is logged in successfully. Another way to verify this is actually opening your Prisma Studio. So I'm going to execute this command pnpm-dlx Prisma Studio. And here you can see if I go to this session table, and you can see that the session is created. And this is the session information for that particular user. Perfect. That means user registrations with email verification is working at this point. Now let's see how we can access session both on the client side and server side using betterauth to render things conditionally on the page. For example, if I go to my navbar component. Now if you take a look at this navbar, you can see that this is a server component. Whenever you want to access session on the server side or server component, you need two things. First, we need this auth instance that we have created. And second thing is we also need these headers from next headers. And then we can access session like this. So we need to access auth.api, and then there's a method available called getSession. When you call this getSession, it expects you to pass an object which contains this headers property, right? So you need to pass the headers, and this is how you get the session on the server side. Now, based on this session data, I can simply render elements conditionally over here like this. So for example, if the session does not exist, I'm going to render these sign in and sign up buttons. Otherwise, I'm going to render this div for now, which says logout. Okay. So if I come to the browser right now, you can see that we are seeing that logout button over here. And we are going to fix all of this, like I am able to access the sign up page later via a middleware. Let's now implement the logout functionality. I'm going to create a new component. Let's call this logout button. This is going to be a client component, as you can see. Now here's the interesting thing. This just contains a single button over here with a text of sign out. And when I click on this button, I call this handle sign out function. In this handle sign out function, first I'm setting the pending to true because I also want to show a loading state in this button. That is why. But this is the important stuff. Notice this is a client component and I'm importing auth client. And in this auth client, I can call this sign out method and I can pass this option also if I want. And what this means is if the sign out is successful, redirect the user to the sign in page. Then I'm going to use this loading button inside of the navbar. And actually, instead of calling this logout button, let's call this sign out button. I'm going to rename this. Okay, so I've renamed this to sign out button. I'm also going to change here sign out button. Okay, now we can use the sign out button inside of the navbar. So I'm going to go to navbar. In here, I'm simply going to import that sign out button like this. If we take a look at our application, you can see that this is the sign out button. Perfect. Now, if I click on this, you can see that we are redirecting to this sign in page. But since this page does not exist at this point, that is the reason we are seeing a 404 page over here. Let's talk about how can you access session on the client side, specifically in the context of next.js. So if we take a look at the documentation, you can see that we can call this get session and use session function that exists in the auth client to get the session on the client side. But if you notice carefully that these are async operations, Now here's the problem. If I convert this function to an client component, I cannot make this an async function. So I'll have to remove this particular thing. Okay. First of all, I'm actually going to get rid of both of these auth and headers. And then I'm going to import auth client. And then here, if I try to do something like this, auth client.get session, and since I cannot use await over here, so I cannot write await over here. So if I do something like this is going to cause hydration issues. And the reason for that is because even though this is a client component, Next.js is still going to render this initially on the server side. And on the server side, this is going to be executed. And then on the client side also, this is also going to be executed. And then the result in both of these scenarios would be different, which is going to cause an hydration issue. So that means we cannot do something like this. And since this get session is a hook, I cannot call this inside of an use effect or any function. So this is problematic. Now, one of the things that we can do to get around this problem is to pass session from its parent, more like this. So I can get rid of this auth client. And then if we go to layout, so the layout contains a snap bar. Make sure the parent is a server component from wherever you're trying to pass to the client component. And in this layout, I'm going to import auth and I'm going to import headers. I'm going to make this an async function. And then I'm going to get the session by calling auth.api.getSession. I also need to pass this configuration object like this. And then I can pass session like this. Okay. So this way I can pass my session information from a server component to a client component. And this is how actually you get the session information inside of a client component if you need something like this. So if we take a look at the application right now, you can see that we do not have any error and this is working as expected. Now this is the exact pattern they show you in the Next.js demo in the Better Auth GitHub repository. Okay, so at this point, the user registrations with email verification is working and sign out is also working. Let's implement sign in now. But before we do that, you will notice that we do not have this session type over here. Now, if I try to import this session probably from Prisma client, you are going to have issues with this. So the TypeScript is basically complaining that the session object that I'm getting and the session object that you have in your table are incompatible. And the reason for that is because the session object that you get from this get session is a combination of session and user information. And inside of this navbar, you're just telling that this session is just going to contain all the information from the session table only. So this is not correct. We need to actually infer the session type from the auth library itself. So I can actually go to auth.ts that I have created. And I can export a type out from this file by doing something like this. So here what I'm basically saying is I want to export this type session and its value is going to be type of auth.infer.session. And then we need to import this session in the nav bar. So I'm going to import this one, session. Okay, so now we are using the right type of session. And since we are passing session from parent to client, and there is also this possibility that session could not exist, like when the user is not logged in. So in that case, we also need to specify that this session could also be null. All right, let's now implement sign-in functionality. So inside of this auth folder, I'm going to create a new folder, sign-in. Okay, this sign-in folder is going to contain another file, page.tsx. And this sign-in page is also going to be exactly like how we have created the sign-up page. So first of all, I'm importing a lot of things from chat.cn. I'm also importing my custom loading button, importing link. Then I'm returning a div from here. This div contains a card element. This card contains this card header and card content, right? And then this card content contains the form component, which contains this form JSX element. And since this is a sign-in form, we only need this email and password field. I'm looping through this array so that we have two fields over here. And then I'm just returning these form field. The render prop will return a form item, which further contains an input over here, as you can see. So pretty much the exact stuff that we have done in the sign up page. And then here we have this loading button. When we click on this button, it actually submits the form. And below this form, we have this div that contains a link forgot password. Now, the first thing that we need to do is we need to create a sign-in schema. So I'll go to zod.ts, and here I'm going to just export this sign-in schema, which is just going to contain two things, email and password. Email schema is going to be exactly like what we have created over here. It should be a string, and if this is required, this email is required error should be shown. The minimum, it should have 1 characters, and it should be an email. And similarly for the password, it should be a string. If the required is true, we are going to show them this error that this password is required. Minimum of 1 characters, minimum of 8 characters. Okay, I think this is redundant. I could remove this line, minimum of 1 from here. So it should have a minimum of 8 and max of 32. Okay, I can then import my sign-in schema from Zod. Then we need to create a form instance using React Hook form. So I'm gonna import use form from React Hook form, Zod resolver from hook form resolver Zod, and Z from Zod. I'm gonna call this use form, pass the necessary options like resolver and default values to get the form instance. And then I'm going to pass all the things that we get from this form instance as a prop to this form component like this. And make sure we add a control prop to all of these form fields. So I'm going to add control, and its value is going to be form.control. And for this pending credentials, I'm going to create a new state variable like this. Let's also import use state from React. And finally, we need to handle this form submission. So I'm going to add an on submit to this, and its value is going to be form.handle submit. And let's call this handle credential sign in. And now I can create my handle credential sign in by doing something like this. So here's what I'm doing in this particular code. Whenever the form gets submitted, I'm calling this handle credential sign in. Inside of this, I'm going to call this auth client.signin.email method, which expects you to pass two arguments. Both of these are objects. In the first object, you are going to pass the email and password. Okay. And in the second one, you are going to have all of these methods available to you, more like callbacks on request, on success, on error. And these are pretty much self-explanatory if you think about it. On request kicks in when the request gets initiated, on success when the request is successful, and on error if there's any error. Okay, so what I'm doing here is when we initiated the request, I'm setting the pending credentials to true, which is going to show a loader in the button. And when the sign in is successful, I'm going to redirect the user to the home page. I'm also going to refresh the router. Now this router.refresh is only necessary in those scenarios, let's say when your navigation bar is a server component and you are showing some elements conditionally inside of the nav bar. So when you change something from here, you also want to update the state of that nav bar. So in that case, I'm gonna do a router.refresh. So okay, so at this point we only need two things, the router and toast. I'm gonna import a router from next navigation like this, and then I'm gonna get the router instance, and then we can use the routers like this. We also need toast from chatcn, so I'm gonna import use toast. We need to get use toast from hooks. All right, so we have imported use toast from hooks use toast. I'm calling this hook to get the toast instance, and then I can show my toast over here like this. And yeah, just make sure we destructure and get the toast instance. This is how we get it. And this CTX is going to be a type of error context, and we can import this error context from betterFetch. Now this betterFetch module is related with betterauth in a sense that betterauth uses this module to make HTTP requests. So I'm going to install this one real quick. I'm going to open the terminal, and I'm going to execute the command pnpm add and then the name of the package, betterFetch fetch. Okay, so this is installed. You can see we are not getting any error, and we should be getting the correct context over here. I think that's it. So this is what we really needed to do to implement the sign-in functionality. Let me repeat this once again so that you can understand this in a clear manner. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And here you can see that we have this form component, which contains this form element, which is returning these form fields. Whenever this form gets submitted, we are calling this handle credential sign-in function. And in this function, we are calling this auth client.signin.email method, which expects you to pass two arguments. Both of these are objects. In the first argument, you pass the data like email and password. And in the second argument, you get access to all of these callbacks like on request, on success, on error, things like that. As soon as the request gets initiated, I'm showing a loader on the button. When the request is successful, I'm redirecting the user to the home page, and I'm also doing a router refresh. And then if there's any error, I'm showing this toast with the message. If the message does not exist, in this case, a very generic message, something went wrong. And then finally, I'm setting pending credentials to false, which is basically going to hide the loader from the button. So let's see if this is working or not. I'll open the application and you can see this is the sign in page. And now I'm going to try to log in with an incorrect password first of all. So when I try to log in, this is showing me error, something went wrong, invalid email or password. Let's try doing this with the correct password. So now if I sign in, you can see that I am logged in. Perfect. So this is working as expected. So at this point, sign in is also working. Let's implement sign in and registration using social auth now. Now, one thing to keep in mind regarding the social authentication. In social authentication, we do not care about email verification, as the email in 99% of the cases is already verified. And during the login process itself, if the user does not exist in our system, BetterAuth is going to create a record for that user automatically, which basically means the registration for the user is going to happen automatically whenever they log in with their social auth. Okay, for oAuth, I'm going to be using GitHub as it is fairly easy to demonstrate. Okay, so the first thing that you need to do, you need to come to your GitHub account, go to settings, then go to developer settings. And here you need to create a new oAuth app. As you can see, I have already created my application. So I'm going to click on this. And here's what you really need to do in this one. The application name could be anything. The homepage URL should be your base URL. And then this is the most important stuff, authorization callback URL. So this should be exactly like this one. API auth callback GitHub. Okay. And then here you have your base URL. After adding all of that information, you can get the client ID, and then you also need to generate a client secret. You can click on this generate a new client secret button and it is going to generate a secret for you. I've already done this. So I'll come to my application, go to .env file, and in this file, I'm going to add the GitHub client ID and GitHub client secret like this. Then below this sign-in form, which we have over here, and just above this div, which contains a link to forgot password page, I'm going to add this div in which we have this loading button. And when I click on this button, I'm going to handle the sign in with GitHub. Okay, now we just need to set up this pending state and then this on click event handler. So I'm going to go to the top of the file, at least at this level. And I'm going to create pending GitHub and set pending GitHub like this. And now similar to this handle credential sign in, I'm actually going to create this function handle sign in with GitHub. And here's what I'm doing in this one. First of all, the process is almost identical. I'm calling this method authClient.signin.social. I'm passing my provider, which is going to be GitHub in this case. When the request gets initiated, I'm showing a loader on the button. On success, I'm redirecting the user to the home page and doing a router refresh. On error, I'm just showing this error. The last thing that we need to do to make this work properly, we need to go to our auth configuration file that we have created, auth.ts. And in this one, we need to add this social providers property, which is going to be an object. And here we can specify all of our social providers. So since right now I'm only using GitHub, here I'm specifying this is the client ID and then this is the client secret. And that's it. This is pretty much all you needed to do to implement the oAuth authentication, including registration, by the way. Let's see if this is working or not. So I'll come to the browser. refresh my application. You can see that right now I'm logged in. I'm gonna sign out, and here I can click on this continue with GitHub. When I click on this, this immediately takes me to this page, and now we can see that we are actually logged in. So if I go to my application tab, you can see that I do have this auth cookie over here. If I click on this sign out button, you can see that that cookie gets destroyed. If I click on this continue with GitHub again, it takes some time to properly log in. And the reason why we are seeing this page almost instantaneously because we have not implemented middleware yet. So we are going to fix that a little bit later in the video. Let's now implement password reset functionality. Inside of this auth folder, I'm going to create a new folder. Let's call this forgot password. Inside of this folder, I'm going to create a file page.tsx. This is also going to be a client component. So this is pretty much the same like all of the forms that we have created so far. Importing a lot of the shared CN components, then creating a form instance with React hook form, passing the Zod resolver so that it can validate all of the data that we have. And then whenever we click on this on submit, we are calling this particular function over here. But before we take a look at this, let's first create the forgot password schema. So if we take a look at the form right now, this just contains a single field over here, okay, in which we are just asking the user enter their email address. Okay, so if I go to zora.ts, here I can just export this forgot password schema out of this file like this. Now let me show you what happens when we actually submit this form in this case. So when we submit this form, first of all, we are showing a loader in the button. And then we are actually getting the auth client and we are calling the forget password. When we call this forget password method, we need to pass these configuration options. In the first one, you specify the email, and the second property is this redirect to. So here's what is going to happen. When user enter their email address in the form and click on the send reset button, we are going to call this function on submit. In this one, we are going to call this method forget password, which exists inside of this auth client. Okay, we're going to pass this email and we're going to pass the redirect to URL. Now here's what this means. So when this function is going to called, it is going to send an email to their email address. And that email is going to contain a link. When they click on this link, and if their link is valid, we want the user to redirect to this particular page, reset password. Okay, that means if the link is valid and the user is really trying to reset their password, we are going to redirect the user to this particular page. And all of this process is going to happen automatically. We just need to tell BetterAuth that this is our reset password page. And if that link is valid, you should redirect the user to this particular page. Now, BetterAuth is not going to send your emails automatically. In order to do that, we first need to configure auth server. So we need to go to this auth.ts file. This email and password object, I'm going to add this method send reset password. So now whenever we are calling this forget password, auth client.forget password, this is actually going to trigger this particular function that we have added over here, send reset password. And in this one, I'm actually sending the email to the user with all of this information, right? Now this email is going to contain a link. User is supposed to click on that link. And if that link is valid, user is going to come to the reset password page. That means we need another page over here. Let's say reset password. Create a file page.tsx inside of this. Now this reset password page is also going to be exactly like all of the other pages that we have created so far in terms of the form. Now this just contains few extra things. For example, in this one, what I am doing is I'm using this use search params and then I'm trying to get this error. So for example, whenever the user clicks on their link, and let's say if that link becomes invalid, or if this is invalid link, that means if it is something that is not generated by our system, BetterAuth is going to add this query parameter error, and its value is going to be invalid token in that case. So here's what I'm doing is first I'm getting that query parameter and I'm simply checking if the token is invalid. If the token is invalid, we're just showing them this UI that your link is invalid and nothing else. But in that case, if we do not have this error, I'm going to render this form basically. Now this form contains two fields, password and confirm password. Okay. Now one thing you notice here is this is function reset password content, and then I'm wrapping this function with a suspense boundary like this. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I'm using use search params over here. And it is mandatory in Next.js 15 that if you're using this, you need to wrap this inside of a suspense boundary. You can also provide a fallback UI to this, but I'm not going to do that. You get the idea. Now, before we see what happens when we submit the form, we need to create this reset password schema. So I'll go to zora.ts. I'm just going to export this reset password schema. Only going to contain two fields, password and confirm password. These should match with each other. If they are not matching, show them this error, passwords don't match. Perfect. Now I'll come to the reset password page. Now let's see what happens when the form gets submitted. So when the form gets submitted, we are calling this reset password function. Remember, when we are sending a reset link to the user, we are calling the forget password function. But when we are actually resetting the password, we are calling the reset password function. And this exists in the auth client, okay? And then we are specifying the new password over here. And then we are showing them this message that the password reset is successful. Login to continue. And we are also redirecting the user to the sign-in page. So this is all you needed to do to make the reset password functionality work in your application with better auth. Now let's see if this is working or not. I'll come to my application. I'll click on this forget password, and here I'm going to enter my email address. I'm going to click on this send reset link. This is telling me if an account exists with this email, you will receive a password reset link. I'll go to my email. You can see that I got this email. Click the link to reset your password. I'm gonna click on this link, and since this link is valid, I am basically redirected to this reset password page along with the token, as you can see over here. And then I'm gonna change my password. I'm gonna click on this reset password button, and now you can see that the password reset successful, login to continue. So let me try login with my new password. I'm gonna come here, I'm gonna sign in, and now you can see that I am logged in. Perfect. That means it is working as expected. Now, few important things to know at this point. First thing is that account linking is on by default, but only if the OAuth provider confirms that email is verified. So what do I mean by that? Let me tell you. So let's consider this example that I have created a new account in this platform using my email and password. And the email that I'm using right now is my original email, as you can see over here. So what happens if I try to log in with a social account with this exact same email address? BetterAuth is going to automatically link both of these accounts, this credentials account and then your OAuth account. And it will make sure that this is the account of one person only. This behavior is called account linking. Now, if you do not want this behavior to be enabled, you can actually go to your auth configuration file, and here you can specify this account property in which we have this option of account linking, which contains this enabled option, and I can set this to false basically like this. So when I set this to false, the account linking is not gonna happen. And if you want, you can just trust a few providers like Google and GitHub. And what this means is that if the user is using either Google or GitHub to log into their account, link with their credentials provider. I'm gonna remove this because I like the default configuration only. Now, if you have this need of manually linking the social account of any user, for example, let's say after they are logged in, you are giving them these options, link their Google account, link their GitHub account. So you can link their accounts manually in that case by calling this auth client dot link social and then passing all of the providers necessary like this. So this is useful in that scenario when you want to manually link their accounts. And this would make sense in that scenario when the user has logged in with their credentials and now they are trying to link their socials with the same account. But what about this other case where the user is logged in with their socials and they also need this ability to log into their account using password also? So in that case, you can do something like this. This set password is only available on the server side for security reasons. You cannot call this on the client side. So you could essentially give them this option where they can set the password, and then BetterAuth is going to take care of everything else for you. Now this is one of the option. Another option that is available to user by default is forgot password page. Let's say I have logged into this application using my GitHub OAuth provider. And now I also need a way to add a password to my account so that I can log in with email and password for those uncertain situations when my GitHub provider is not working. So I can actually go through this forget password flow, and this is going to set the password for my account. Okay, so you have these two options. Okay, now let's talk about require email verification. When this option is set to true, user must verify their email address before they can log into your system. If you want to trigger the email verification manually, you can call this auth client or send verification email function. You pass the email and then you pass the callback. Now here's a very important part. So you can see in the email verification we have specified send on sign up to true. And what this means is whenever users create an account, we want to send them an email that contains a link to verify their email address. So this actually makes sense in case of credentials provider. But what if user is trying to log into their account using the OAuth providers? So in that case, if the OAuth provider claims that this email is not verified, BetterAuth is going to send them a verification email during the sign up itself so that they can verify their email address. But the important thing to note at this point is in case of OAuth providers, verification of email is not required to log in. So this option that we have over here, require email verification, this is only for email and password. So just make sure you have a way to properly verify the email address of the user if you're using an OAuth provider that allows users to have this account in which they have not verified their email address. I think Discord has something like this. But almost for 99% of the providers, you are going to have a verified email address only. For example, Google is going to have a verified email address. GitHub is going to have a verified email address. So at this point, registrations is working, password reset is working, email verification is working, login with credentials is working, and login with social providers is also working. Now there's just one problem. All of the routes that we have in our application is actually public right now. That means even when I click on this sign in, go to continue with GitHub, I'm logged in and I can still go to sign up page. Let me show you. You can see, right? So let's fix this using middleware. At the root of the project, I'm going to create a new file. Let's call this middleware.ts. So here's what I'm doing in this middleware file. Let's take this step by step. First of all, I'm importing betterFetch, next response, and this type session from auth. Then I'm setting few variables like these are going to be my auth routes. Then these are going to be my password routes. And then I'm exporting this async function auth middleware. And here with this config matcher option, I'm specifying for which request my middleware should be executed. So with this configuration, I'm specifying that my middleware should be executed for all the requests except API routes, static files, and images. Okay. Now let's take a look at this auth middleware. So in this auth middleware, I'm just getting the path name and then I'm checking what type of route this is. And here's the important stuff that you need to know. In order to get the session inside of this middleware, we actually need to make a request to this API endpoint API auth get session. We need to provide the base URL and then we also need to pass the headers which contains the cookie. And the reason why we are making a request like this to get the session data on each middleware request is because we want our application to be edge compatible also. So I don't know if you know about this, but middleware in Next.js only supports edge runtime. And you could think of edge runtime as a very light runtime in a sense that it does not support all of the features that you get with a Node.js runtime. For example, you cannot access file system, things like that. And because of this limitation exists, and we want to make sure that our authentication works as expected, we are actually making just a simple request to this API endpoint, which is going to get the session info. And then based on this session info, we can apply conditions over here. So first thing what I'm doing here is, if the session does not exist, that means the user is not logged in. And if they're trying to access either the auth route or the password route, let them access that page. Otherwise, if they're trying to access any other page and they are not logged in, redirect the user to the sign in page. If we are here, that means the user is logged in. And if they are trying to access any auth route or password route, do not let them access these pages because it does not really make sense. Think about it. If the user is logged in, why would you want them to able to access the sign in page or sign up page? It does not really make sense. And similarly for the password route. Okay. And just to show you, these are the routes that I'm talking about. All right. All other requests, I'm simply going to allow those requests. So this is a very simple middleware that will do just fine job in our specific scenario. So let's actually test this out. I'm gonna come here, I'm going to refresh this page. You can see that I am right now logged in. I am not allowed to access the sign up page. So if I try to go to sign in page, let's say, I'm not allowed to do that, you can see. But if I go and click on the sign out button, I should be able to access the sign up or sign in page. You can see. Perfect. We log in again. Now you can see that this is working as expected. Now, one of the things you probably have noticed is whenever I click on this continue with GitHub, it is not showing me that screen from GitHub where it is asking me, do you want to allow this application to access to your account? And the reason for that is because I have tried this multiple times and it only asks that once. That is why we are not seeing that screen over here. Let's now talk about some of the cases that you would encounter when working with better auth. So one of the cases, if we take a look at the schema.prisma file, you can see that we have all of these models, right? Now let's say you want to add another field to this model. And let's say I'm talking about a field called premium. This is going to be a Boolean field and the default value of this is going to be false. And now I can generate the Prisma client. So Prisma has this idea that we have this premium field also present in this user model. But the problem with this is not going to work. Let me show you. I'm going to go to layout file. And in this one, I'm simply going to log the session for now. Okay. And let's see what do we get as the value of the session. So I'm gonna come to my application and I'm going to refresh. So right now I think I'm not logged in. So we should be getting null, as you can see over here. Perfect. But when I'm logged in, now you can see all of the session information over here. And you can see that this session object contains two important things. It contains the information related to session and it also contains the information related to user. But the user object does not contain the premium field that we have added to the database. If you're thinking it's probably because we need to do a Prisma DB push also, let's try doing that. I'm going to do pnpm tlx Prisma DB push. This is going to push the changes and then generate the client. Now if I come here and take a look at the session, I'm gonna come to the application, do a refresh, I'll come here and you can see that we still do not have that information in this user object. Okay, so what is the right way to do this? So whenever you are adding any extra fields, either in the user or session model, you need to go to your auth configuration file. And since I have added my premium field inside of the user model, I'm gonna be doing something like this. So I have this user property available. This is going to be an object. And here I can specify all of the additional fields. So you can see I have this premium field, which is not required. And this is going to be of a Boolean type. Okay. So just by doing this, now if I try accessing my session, you can see that the premium does exist. And since we have added this and in the database premium does not exist for this particular user, that is why we are seeing undefined. But if I start from scratch, let me show you. I'm gonna terminate the development server. I'm gonna do Prisma DB push, and I'm actually going to force reset all the database. So now we are starting from scratch. I'm gonna start the development server again. I'm gonna refresh this one. I'm logged out basically. Logged out basically, as you can see over here. Now when I click on continue with GitHub, this is going to create a new account for me. And when this time I try to log in the session, you can see that the premium value is set to false because the default value for this we have set is false. Okay, so this is how you can add extra fields in a proper way, type safe way to your models. Now the case number 2 is, Now by default, the session that BetterAuth creates has an expiry day of about 7 days. If you want to customize this behavior, you can do that by adding this session property. Now this session basically has two important properties: expires in and then update age. Okay, so expires in is pretty straightforward. So expires in specifies when the session should be expired. The default is set to 7 days, as you can see over here. And then we have this update age. And this basically means, so let's say I log into my account today. Then the expiry date for my session is going to be 7 days from now on. But let's say I'm accessing my account in the next day also. So based on the user's last activity, it is going to update the expires in, right? So expires in will be set from the last activity date of the user plus 7 days in this case. The reason why we do that is because we do not want the user to be logged out when they are actually using our application. Think about it. So let's say when they first logged in and we have set the expiry date to about 7 days and they have used our application 5 days, 6 days, and they're on the 7th day. Suddenly, when they'll be using the application on the 7th day, they'll be logged out because the session now is expired. So we do not want to do that. That is why we are setting that every day you also need to update the expires in based on the activity of the user. Now, some of the other methods that you need to know when you are working with session is you have this revoke session method available. And here you can pass the token basically. This is going to revoke the session that matches with this particular token. Okay. And by the way, this session token is the value that we have present inside of the session object. So when we log the session, you can see that this session object contains this token. So you need to pass this token over here. And this is going to revoke the session. Now you also have this option of revoking all other sessions. And what this means is revoke all other session except the current one. And the reason why we have multiple sessions is because I can log into my account from multiple of these devices, right? So you must have seen this particular functionality like logout from everywhere. This is how you do it. Now, if you want to revoke all the sessions of the currently logged in user, you can use this method revoke sessions. Now, the only difference between this revoke sessions and revoke other session is this is going to log out the user from everywhere, and this is going to log out user from everywhere except the current device. You also have this option of revoking the session whenever a user changes this password. So for example, you could imagine in the settings page, you give them this option of changing their password. Then on the client side, we can call this function change password, and then we can specify a new password, current password. We can specify revoke other sessions and set it to probably true or false depending upon whatever you want to do. So if you set this to true, when the user is changing their password, all of their session will be revoked and they'll have to log in again with their new password. Now, if we take a look at the middleware, you can see that for every single request, we are actually making a request to this endpoint, which is getting the session information from the database. Now, this is not very ideal. So what you can do if you want, you can come to your auth configuration file. And inside of this session, you also have this option of catching the cookies. So I can actually add this cookie catch object over here. This is going to be enabled, and then max age. This age is going to be in seconds basically here. So by doing something like this, what would happen is whenever a request comes in which we need to get the information related to session or something, which is stored in this HTTP only cookie, we'll get that information from the catch itself. Okay, instead of making a new fresh request to the database. So this is going to significantly improve the performance. Do keep in mind, you will do something like this when your sessions are not changing very frequently. But let's imagine this scenario that you have enabled the cookie catch, but you want the fresh data from the database itself. For example, let's say I'm taking the example of layout only. So inside of this get session configuration option, I can actually add an object like query. And in this query, I can specify disable cookie catch. So what this means, whenever I am trying to access the session information over here, do not use cookie catch. Get the latest data from the database and pass this session to, let's say, my components on navbar. Okay, so this is just an example, but this is just to demonstrate you that something like this is possible. So here in the auth configuration, we have specified that the cookie catching is enabled, right? And then in some of the components, probably if you want the fresh data, you can actually pass this option to disable the cookie cache, and this is going to get you the fresh data from the database. Perfect. BetterAuth also has an inbuilt rate limiter to help manage traffic and prevent abuse. And by default in the production mode, the rate limiter only allows about 100 requests in a span of 60 seconds. If you want to customize this behavior, you can use this rate limit property like this. Okay? And in this one, you can specify that every 10 seconds, only 100 requests are allowed. Now, for some of the other routes like sign in email, we have a different kind of settings. For example, the default setting for sign in email endpoint is going to be limited to 3 requests within 10 seconds. And what this means is if I come to my application, let's say, and first actually I have to make a production build. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to say pnpm run build. I'm going to start the production server. Now I'll come here. So now we are running in the production mode. That means the rate limiter should be working. So let's try log into my account with an incorrect password or something. But before we do that, we need to actually set up a password for my account that I have created. So I'm going to click on this forget password. I'm going to provide my email address. I'll click on send reset link. This is going to send the link to my account. I'm going to click on this link. Okay, it seems to me I'm basically redirected to this sign in page. So this shouldn't be happening. Let's see what is going on. So the issue is that in this middleware, this URL is incorrect. This is the correct URL. And another issue I see is related to this base URL, which we have setting it to request.nexturl.origin. And this is going to cause issues in production. So instead of using something like this, I'm actually gonna simply specify my BetterAuth URL like this. This simply represents the base URL of my application. Now I'm going to build my application again, start the production server. I'll click on send reset link. This is going to send a forget password link to my account. I'll click on this link and now we can change the password. Basically, we can set the password in this case. Okay, so the password has been set. That means now I can log into my account using this password also. Okay, this is working as expected, but let's try inputting some wrong password this time. So I'm gonna enter some wrong password. This is 1, this is 2, this is 3, and then after that this is going to show us too many requests, please try again later. That means our rate limiter is working as expected. Perfect. Now if you do not like this behavior that only 3 requests are allowed every 10 seconds, you can further customize this by doing something like this. You can use this rate limit property. Then obviously you can adjust window and max request, and then you can specify your custom rules that applies to sign in email page. You get the idea. Let's now take a look at some of the other important methods that are available to you. You also have this update user function available, and you can use this update user method to update the user information by doing something like this. Now BetterAuth also gives you this ability to change the email address of the user if you want. If you want to enable that feature, all you need to do is inside of this user object, you need to add this method change email. You need to enable this, and then you can add this send change email verification function. Now here's the important part. If the email address of the currently logged in user is verified and they are trying to change their email address, BetterAuth is going to send them a new email so that they can verify their new email address. But let's say for some reason their current email address is not verified and they are trying to change to a new email. In that case, BetterAuth is just going to change their email directly without sending this verification email, because it actually makes sense when you think about it. If the user has not verified their email and they are logged into your system, that means you have not enabled this option of require email verification. So in that case, when the user is trying to just change their email, we are not sending any verification email. But if you have an option like this, which basically requires email verification and user has logged into their account, that means their existing email is verified. So when they are changing to new email address, we want to make sure that their new email address is also verified. So this is what you need to add in the auth configuration file. And then on the client side, you can call this method change email that exists on the auth client instance. Basically, you can pass the new email and then call back URL. After the email verification is done, user is going to be redirected to this particular route. In BetterAuth, you also have a lot of other plugins available, such as two-factor, username, phone number. You can use all of these plugins to enhance the basic core functionality of BetterAuth. One of the plugins that I'm gonna be using in this video is this admin, which is very important and gives you a lot of really important stuff if you're building probably a SaaS kind of application. One of the bigger challenge in building SaaS kind of application is you need to manage users. So let's see how we can use this admin plugin to do some of the really important stuff when it comes to managing user from an admin dashboard or something. So first thing first, I'm going to import this plugin admin like this. And then inside of this plugin section, I'm going to simply call this admin like this. Okay. And by the way, the errors that we are seeing over here is that this is just telling us that you are not using these variables. So let's get rid of these for now. And then we need to migrate the database. But since we are using MongoDB database, we need to actually take a look at the schema, like what are the other information that we need to add. So if we take a look at the schema, you can see that we need all of these things. First of all, inside of the user table, we need to add 4 fields: role, band reason, and ban expires. This is the type of the field, and then all of these are optional basically. And in the session table, we need to add this field impersonated by. This impersonated by is the ID of the admin who is impersonating the current user. Now, if you do not know anything about impersonation, imagine this scenario. Let's say you have built an application. Now, one of the users basically raised a ticket and said, I'm having this and this issue in my account. Now, in order to debug this issue, the more information you can get, the better. So one of the things you can do, you can log into that user's account without knowing their credentials. And this process is called impersonation. And with the help of BetterAuth and admin plugin, we can do something like this in a very easy manner. So let's set up our schema now. I'm going to go to schema.prisma. Inside of this user model, I'm going to add 4 fields: role, band reason, and ban expires. Okay, the default role is going to be user. The default value for band is false. The ban reason is going to be string and optional. And then ban expires is going to be a Unix timestamp for the ban expiration. All right. And then in the session model, we need to add this impersonated by field. All right. Now the last step is to get the admin client plugin. Okay. So I'm gonna go to my auth client. We need to get the admin client instance and we need to use this on the client side. Now I'm going to do a force reset of the database. I'm gonna start the development server. I'll come to my application and let's say go to localhost 3000. Right now I'm not logged in. So this should redirect me to the sign-in page. As you can see, I'm simply going to click on continue with GitHub to create myself a new account. Okay, the account has been created. Then I'll come to Prisma Studio to see what do we have in the database. I'll come here, then I'll go to user, and then you can see that we have this role field and the default role is set to user. Now for the first user, you need to go to your database and set its role to admin manually. Or if you are just seeding the database, you can handle this over there. I'm gonna do this manually in this case. So any user that has a role set to admin will be an admin and they'll be able to execute all of the things that we have present in the admin plugin. So now what I'm gonna do, I'm going to create a new page inside of this app directory. Let's call this admin. Let's create a page.tsx file. Now this admin page is going to be a very simple page. It just contains a heading and a table, as you can see over here. Okay. And now what we need to do, we need to create a new component users table, which is going to show us a list of all of the users that we have in our application. So inside of this components folder, I'm going to create a new folder. Let's call this admin. And inside of this, I'm going to create a new component users table. Then in this users table, what I'm doing is I'm just importing these tables from shadcn. I'm making a request to the backend to fetch all of the users. And then I'm rendering all of those users over here. So if you take a look at the fetch users function, I'm actually using the auth client.admin. And then I'm using this list users method. In this one, I can pass how many items do I need from the database. So I'm just getting the first 10 over here. And then if we get the data, setting the users by providing all of this data. So at this point, if I take a look at the admin page, you can see that we are seeing our admin dashboard over here. Right now, we only have this one user. Now let me quickly create another dummy account. I'll go to incognito window, then go to localhost 3000 basically. And here I'm going to simply create a new account, dummy account basically. Now if we refresh our admin dashboard, you can see that a new user is here. And we can clearly see that the email of this user is not verified from here. So let's go to database and manually verify the email address of this particular user. I'll come here, refresh this one. I'm going to set this to true, save one change. And now if I come here, refresh the page, you can see that the email is verified. And this user should be able to log into their account. If I just come to localhost 3000 and try to log in as that user, you can see that the user is logged in. Perfect. Now, similar to this list users method, we have a lot of other admin related methods available to us because we are using the admin plugin, right? Let me show you. If you want, you can also create a user directly from the admin dashboard by calling this function create user. The only thing that you need to know, we are using all of this on the client side, auth client. So you need to access the auth client instance, then admin, and then these methods. So create user, pretty self-explanatory, pass all of the necessary options, and then this user is going to be created. We already looked at this list users method. Now in this query, you can pass a lot of all of these options. So for example, let's say you want to implement a search, you can pass a search object like this, which contains these three properties: field, operator, and value. And based on that, it is going to give you the latest data from the database, right? And then we have a lot of all of these options also available. If you want to change the role of a user, you can use the set role method. If you want to ban a user, you can use the ban user method. When you call this ban user, you can specify the user ID of the user. You can specify why are you banning this user, right? If you do not pass this ban reason, the default is going to be set, which is going to be no reason. And then if you want, you can also set an ban expiration. That means you can do something like, I want to just ban this user, but only for 7 days or something. So you can achieve those kind of things with this one. Similar to this ban user, you have this unban user. Now, if you want a list of all of the sessions that is available for any particular user, you can use list sessions method. Now, if you want to revoke any session of any user, you can simply use this method revoke session and then pass the session token. But I think this is wrong. And the reason for that is, if you try to do something like this, in the documentation, they say that it is something like revoke session. Let me show you. So if I try to write something like this, let's say await auth client dot admin, and then if I try to access a revoke session method, here I'm supposed to pass an object where I need to pass the session token basically like this. Okay. You could imagine that you can pass the session token over here, but the point is revoke session does not exist on type this and this. Did you mean revoke user session? So this is one of the, probably they have not updated the documentation yet, but this revoke session is not correct. You will have to use this revoke user session with the admin plugin. Okay. And if you want to revoke all the sessions of a user, you need to do revoke user sessions. Okay. Now let's talk about impersonation. Now to implement this impersonate user functionality, what I'm going to be doing is I'm simply going to create another component inside of this admin folder. Let's call this impersonate. This is again going to be a client component. This just contains a button, and here's what happens when I click on this button. When I click on this button, I call this handle impersonate user function. In this function, I'm going to call impersonate user method that is available inside of auth client admin. And then I can pass the user ID of the user, which I want to impersonate. Then I'm going to redirect the user to the home page. And just to actually see if this is working or not, I'm actually going to the home page. In this home page, I'm going to access the session. So I'm going to import the auth from auth like this. Then we need to get the headers also like this. Then we can get the session by calling auth.api.getSession. We need to pass headers also. So I'm going to await and get the headers like this. And now I can just add a text. you are logged in as session.user.email. This would be fine. Also, if we want, we can actually remove this session logic from layout. So I'm going to remove all of this. And then I'm going to remove this prop also from navbar component. I'll come to navbar and then I'm actually going to convert this to a server component only. So that means I can do something like this to get the session info and then everything should be same. Perfect. All right. So if I come to my application, let's say I go to home page, you can see that you are logged in as aditya03pratap@gmail.com. And now let's include this impersonate user component inside of the table. And again, just to make things clear, this is just accepting the user ID of the user you want to impersonate. Whenever we click on this button, we are calling this auth client.admin.impersonate user, passing the user ID, and then redirecting the user to the home page. That's it. So I'm gonna come to users table. I'm going to add another table cell over here, and I'm going to import this impersonate user component, and I'm going to pass the user ID like this. Okay, let's see if this works or not. I'm gonna refresh this once. Now this impersonate button over here in my account does not make sense because I am already logged into this account. But you can simply add a condition that is simply going to hide this button for the currently logged in user if you want. But here's the thing. If I click on this impersonate button for this test@test.com, you'll see that I get the notification you are now impersonating this user, and you can see that you are logged in as test@test.com. Now, one of the improvements that we can do, in fact, we should definitely do, is I can go to middleware and then I can actually create another variable called admin routes. And then later, just after this line, I'm going to add this another condition is admin route. So if the user is trying to access an admin route and their role is not admin, simply redirect the user to the home page. Let's also add this variable like this. Okay. So this user cannot access the admin route now. That means if I come here, he cannot access the route. Now, unfortunately, at this point, as I am making this video, there is no method like stop impersonation exist. So it is actually an open issue in their GitHub repo. So it is probably a work in progress. I do see the logic in which they have implemented something like this. For example, if we take a look at this commit, stop impersonating, you can see that they have implemented this, but I think they have not merged this with main branch yet. So probably this is a work in progress, but something like stop impersonating at this point does not exist. So if you want to get out of here, you simply need to sign out and then you need to log into your account again. Now, if you want, you can adjust the impersonation session duration. So you have this option available, impersonation session duration. So you can actually come to your auth configuration file. And inside of the plugin sections where you have called the admin, I can simply pass a configuration object to this one, more like this. And here I can specify the impersonation session duration in seconds. So 3600 second basically means 1 hour. But according to me, this is probably a bug because no matter what I set this value to, the impersonation session duration just always set at 1 day exact. Let me show you. If I set this to 60 seconds, let's say, okay, so this is right now set to only 60 seconds. If I come to the browser, go to the admin panel, click on this test user to impersonate this test user. You can see that right now I'm impersonating his account. I go to Prisma Studio, then I'll go to session. So we can see all of the sessions that has ever existed. But the problem is this is not very clear. So I'm going to actually delete all of the sessions that are related to impersonation. And I know that these records are related to impersonation because we can see this impersonated by field and we can see the ID of the user who is impersonating these sessions. So I'm going to delete these two records. Let's go to the account again. So this user should be logged out. And I'm actually going to log out this user from here. In fact, let's actually delete all of these session data. I'm going to delete all of that. I'll come to my application, log into my account. I'll go to admin dashboard. Then I'll impersonate this session. At this point, we should only have 2 sessions in the sessions table. So if I come here, refresh the page, you can see that we only have 2 records. So first one was this session that was created when we logged it to our account. And then the second record exists, which is showing the impersonation session. The interesting thing to know is that if you take a look at the expire set, you can see that this is set to 30/11/2024. And right now at the time of making this video, it is November 29. So this is exact 1 day from now on. Let me delete this real quick. Now I'm gonna come to my code. I'm going to adjust this again to, let's say, I don't know, maybe let's say 7 days. Let's see if this works or not. I'll come to my application, sign out, log into my GitHub account, go to admin panel, impersonate this test user, come to Prisma Studio, refresh the page. And now we can see that the record that is related with impersonation, the expire set of this record is still 30/11/2024, exactly 1 day from now on. So this is probably a bug or something that I am not understanding properly. All right, that's it. That's it for this video. If you found this video valuable in any way, do like and subscribe to my channel. I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.